Since 1975, third grade boys and girls from the Big Walnut schools have come to the Sunbury Square to see the present buildings, see photographs from the olden days at each site, and to learn some town history. I'm Polly Horn, and I'm going to be your hostess today and be your guide around the square. Let's look at this photograph. It's the earliest one we have that shows the Myers Inn Museum, the big building down there on the right. The street in front of us is Granville Street, going towards the west. If you look straight ahead, it looks like there's a barn sitting right there in the middle of the street. Well, it is the livery barn that went to the Myers Inn, but it's not in the street because the street ended at Columbus Street. It didn't go all the way through. What is this thing? Did you guess it was an airplane? Sorry, you would be wrong. Let's look at the picture. What do we see in it? Do we see a horse with a man or a woman in a wagon? And is the street paved? No, it's a mud dirt road. So that can't be an airplane because they didn't have airplanes in this time frame. This thing up at the top looks like somebody ate an apple and left the core and threw it up in the air. But it belongs there. If you look down in the picture, do you see the white lines running through the trees? Those are electric wires. So this picture had to have been taken sometime after electricity was started, but before airplanes and before the cars. So that would make it in the very early 1900s or the very end of the 1800s. So the thing that looked like an airplane was really just a wrinkle in the photograph. I could have photoshopped it out, but then I wouldn't be able to show you why I wanted you to look carefully at pictures. There'll be lots of things in pictures that look like they are something that they are not. You can become a good photo detective by studying the clues in photographs. And if you study them carefully, you'll learn not to get fooled when people try to tell you things are what they aren't. Lawrence and William Myers founded Sunbury in 1816. Lawrence Myers is the one we follow the most because he was the one that built the Myers Inn Museum. It started out as just a small one-room house, which, by the way, is still inside that big building. It was a house for Lawrence, his wife, Eliza, their two boys, and their daughter. In 1820, the state of Ohio decided to make a road out of the Indian Trail that went in front of the Myers Inn. So he decided to build a stagecoach inn over next to the corner, or closer to the corner. And this he did in 1820 for the opening of the road. In 1824, he added an addition to the building and hooked the two other pieces together. So now he had an L-shaped building that looked very much like it does today. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the very earliest ones, but this one was built after, or taken after the balcony was put on and the pillars. And that happened in 1865 after the Civil War by Judith and Skeels. The building has also been known as the Hopkins House, the addition to the community library, and the Big Walnut Area Historical Society, which now owns it and calls it the Myers Inn Museum. Next door to the Myers Inn was the 35 South Columbus Street, and this was the Gelston Bakery. If you look very carefully over to the left, you can see the Myers Inn is still showing there at the side. In front of the bakery is Mildred Gelston, who was about 2 years old when this picture was taken. It was not uncommon for there to be a store on the first floor of a business, and above it the family would live. And notice the curtains are blowing out the windows because they didn't have screens like we have today. The neat thing about the Gelston Bakery is the fact that when the first worker came to work in the morning, he would knock on the door downstairs. One of the members of the family would open the window upstairs over the door, and they would hand out the key tied to a long string. They would fish it down over the sill and down to the person waiting to come in the front door. That person would unlock the door and let go of the key, and it would be pulled back upstairs and stored in the family quarters. When you come to the Myers Inn, keep your eyes peeled because that key is on display in the museum. This picture was taken in 1915. Now that is not when the building was built, it was when the photograph was taken. Whenever you see the red numbers on the pictures, that will tell you that's when the photograph happened. This was when, in this picture, it was already the Gelston Bakery, but Gelston did not build it. Jakey Burr built it originally. He built it to be a store and a tavern. Jakey also owned the stone quarry at the end of Cherry Street, and he put a stone cellar in this building. We used the stone from that when we remodeled the Myers Inn to put the fireplace back in the 1816 room. Later, Roots Bakery bought the bakery from Gelston's. Next door was a livery barn or a blacksmith shop. This was originally owned by Cornelius Wilcox, and it had been purchased in this picture by Dave Rosecrans. Now, if you see where Dave is sitting in his car, just in front of him in the still back of the car is a little thing sticking up out of the ground, and that is the gasoline pump, because he actually had the filling station in that building. Well, as I told you, Wilcox was the first one that had the blacksmith shop. Later, Cantrell's connected part of these buildings together and added another one, and they had the Sinclair filling station here. Fletcher's changed it to Arco and also had the filling station. Then Lawson's came along and took everything down, which is how we got the stone from the quarry for our fireplace, and they built the Lawson store, which later became the Dairy Mart, which now is owned by Brown and Payne, and they sell insurance in there. Henry Cook owned a harness shop at 25 South Columbus Street. Henry is the man standing back in the doorway. It looks like he has a skirt on, but it's really a leather apron. When you are running a harness shop, you have to cut leather, and it's very dangerous. You can cut your legs. So they would wear heavy leather aprons to protect themselves. Harness shops do not only make harnesses for horses, they also make saddles. They make belts, make suspenders, anything made out of leather. The building was converted into an apartment house. This is a picture of it when it was called the Deering House in 1966. And by 1999, it was owned by Wandel and Associates, and they have an accounting business in there today. Henry lived next door to that harness shop in this house. Now in 1919, all these people were standing in front of his house. Does anyone know what happened in 1919? Well, women had been working for 70 years to get the right to vote. And in 1919, they finally got to vote. Before that, a woman could not own property. She could not have a bank account. And if her husband died and there was no other male member of the family that would step in, she lost her children. They were second-class citizens. They were just treated just like any other cow or horse on the farm. So in 1919, after 70 years of working hard and women got the right to vote, this was the first political rally in Sunbury. If your family has lived around this area for a long time, like mine, you may have members of your family in that picture. My grandmother is in there and my great grandmother. So all of them are women coming to the few men over to the left that are probably the candidates running for something, some office. The building has been used as an accounting building, apartment building, barber shop, Center for Ghost Town Research, and a barber shop. And Viva Cuts is in there now. So probably some of you get your hair cut. Let's go on up the square to Lyman and Martha Cook's house. Martha Myers was the daughter of Lawrence Myers, who started the little house down in the Myers Inn. And she married Lyman Cook. They lived in a log cabin. Now the log cabin goes across the front inside this building. His mother and father moved there, and they built another log cabin going back. So you can see it's like an L-shaped house now. So there are two separate log cabins. And eventually this was framed in as one house. In front of this house in 1908 was my father when he was 2 years old, not quite 2 years old, and he's in a skirt. Does anyone know why boys wore skirts? Something hadn't been invented that we have today. They hadn't invented rubber pants, and they hadn't invented Pampers. And without those, every time a baby would wet their pants, they would wet all their clothes. Well, if they wore a skirt instead of pants, they didn't get their clothes as wet. So until a little boy was toilet trained, he had to wear a skirt. So this is my father before he's toilet trained at 2. Later, Dr. Carpenter owned the house. Now, it doesn't even look like the same house, but it really is. They just put a front porch on it and put a dormer into probably the main hall into the bedrooms upstairs. Dr. Carpenter was the town doctor in 1966, and he was an older man in the 50s, and he had taken care of my ankle. So I had a lot of fond memories of Dr. Carpenter, and we have a lot of his tools at the Myers Inn Museum. By 1999, it had been sold, and it had become the Mean Bean. Next door to the house was this building that was built to be a filling station, probably built sometime between 1915 and 1920. In this first picture, you can see the tank that's there on the black post with a white light or dome up on the top of it. This is what it looked like when it was Walt Gross's Marathon Station in 1950. This building picture was taken in 1966. And there are 2 tanks in this one. Martindale's had a pizza parlor in there. There are apartment buildings, antiques, tanning salon, flowers, and it changed the outside frequently, but it was always the same basic structure. This is when it was an antique and flower shop that belonged to Raymond's Village Antiques, and everyone loved all the things he put out in front. But the building was not taken care of, and it got worse and worse. And the people that owned it couldn't sell it because it had tanks in the ground, and it was very expensive to take those gasoline tanks out. So the village finally bought it, and when they got ready to take it down, they had to bid, and you bid so much for each tank. Well, the village came to me and said, "How many tanks do you think are there?" And I said 3. And they said, no, everybody else says it's 1 or 2. And I said, no, it's 3. It was 1 in one place and 2 more. Well, back then you had to bid according to the number of tanks you had in the ground because it was very expensive to take those out. So the village did really bid 3. But when they were taking it down, when they took down the first building that was built, back in that was another tank. So altogether there were 4 tanks on that corner. When they got it all down, they kept it as a little park. Five years later, at that very corner, is this lovely little park, which says Sunbury, Ohio, founded 1816. If we could cross diagonally across the intersection there and look up Cherry Street toward the east, it would have looked like this. This picture was in the early 1900s. Ah, look at that. That's a different kind of street light. It looks like a lady's necklace. This is what the building looked like from the front that's on the left. It was built by the Knights of Pythias to be a KFP hall. This picture is very hard to see, but if you look over to the right, you can see a marquee over the door. That was the theater, and people would come in that middle door and go upstairs. You see on the above there are only 2 doors, but they added a third door, and you went in the middle door and you went upstairs to the theater, and you could watch movies. Now, the movies that they showed up there were the old black and white ones that you had to read what people said because they were silent movies. So people played the piano up there. And so we would have this dramatic piano music going. Now, there's something you have to have in order to have a theater. Do you know what that would be? You've got to have electricity. The Burr Mill was down where the barbecue place is, down on North Street and Columbus Street. And the Burr boys had gone to college and they had discovered about electricity. So they came back and they talked to their dad and decided that they would make electricity as a byproduct of the mill. And they could sell it to people around town. Well, the first one they sold it to was the Methodist Church, was across the street by the cemetery. And it worked very well. So then they sold the town enough electricity to have those street lights on the corners that we see in the upper picture up there. Well, this particular picture that we're looking at now had the theater upstairs, and you can see over to the side there's a gasoline pump because there was a gas station there too. Well, there was a problem because Mr. Burr had this way that he would turn off the electricity at night. He would eat his dinner and he would go over to the Burr Mill and read 2 pages in the Bible. And when he was finished, he would turn off the electricity. Now, if the electricity goes off in the middle of the movie, you're not going to be very happy, are you? No, that made people very angry. So it became a job or sort of a trick that they played on Mr. Burr. So they would look around and they would find somebody and they would say, okay, Bob, this is your night to go down and talk to Mr. Burr. The movie is going to last 45 minutes past his thing. So you've got to talk for 45 minutes before you let him read the Bible and then shut the electricity off. So that meant you didn't get to see the movie this week. But you know what? Next week you get in free and somebody else has to go talk to Mr. Burr. Now let's think about this a minute. If you were smart enough to make electricity, don't you think you'd be smart enough to know that people were tricking you? I think it was Mr. Burr's way of helping the people see the movies. The building was purchased as a store. at the beginning after the movie theaters were in there. This was probably in the early 1940s. It was the first supermarket and self-serve supermarket in Sunbury. This is little boy there is pushing the first grocery cart. Now we don't think about that being a first because we have so many of them in the stores, but this was the first one, and it was on that first floor of that building. This is what it looked like if you were on the steps taking a picture down there of all the groceries. The store was sold to Mr. Miller, and it was a Miller implement. Then it became, in 1999, it became a hardware store. It was Fling's hardware store until 2009. They had it for 10 years. Journey Church then had it for 3 years. It became a computer programming build, and now it's Serve. The statue of General Rosecrans was a community project that was started by the Historical Society and the Rosecrans group that met with them. It was put on the square in September 2013. You would have been too young to remember it, but your parents can remember it. But it is still history because it's something that happened yesterday. This is the slide that I call the Street of Banks, because there are 2 banks on this same little block. This is not really the name it should be anymore because there really are not 2 banks there. But anyway, we always called it the banks on the north side. This picture was taken in 1999. The first little bank is next to the KFP Hall. It was a very small, cute little building built by D.C. Hoover and Howard Kring, and it was for the Sunbury Savings and Loan. That sign that's in the window is hanging in the Myers Inn Museum, and you can see it when you go there. There have been several things in there, an antique shop, and right now Barbo's Tax Service is in that building. On up the street was the Farmers Bank. This is where the brick building is today. The Farmers Bank was built out of stone from the quarry at the end of Cherry Street. I want you to look at how the steps go up into this building. Today, when we build a building, we do not put steps up into it. But back then, we had to put steps in it, because until the 1930s, there were no underground sewers in Sunbury. The first sewers in Sunbury were built by the WPA, which was in the early 1930s. Up until that time, when it rained hard, the rain would simply go in your building, unless you had steps and elevated the building higher. It is also the reason that there are high sills inside the buildings. When you're in the Myers Inn, not only do you have to go up the steps, you have to be careful and step over the sill that also was added to keep the water out. But anyway, let's look at this Farmers Bank. Inside the bank, there was a brass grate that went all around where the tellers were. And in front of each teller, there was also bulletproof glass. So it was underneath that grate, which was just kind of decorative. The thing you can't really see in this picture is over on the right-hand side behind this teller, there is a vault. Now the vault is a safe that they kept the money in. They used a Wells Fargo vault, which was a big square box type of metal thing up on 4 legs. On the top of this vault, there was a stuffed raccoon. I don't know where the raccoon came from or why it was stuffed and set up on that vault, but it was up there as a decoration. Well, one night before there was any electricity, the robbers came to town. They broke in the front door, and they put dynamite on the vault, and they blasted it off. So the door flew open, but the next day when the banker came, the front door of the bank is open, the bank to the vault is open, but all the money is still sitting in the vault. But over by the door is that raccoon. So they think that the raccoon became airborne when the dynamite went off. He flew through the air and hit the robbers, scared them so much that they ran off and didn't take the money. So when you go to the Myers Inn, be sure you take a look at the raccoon that's in there that saved our bank. He became a very famous raccoon for people in Sunbury. That that bank was replaced by a brick building in 1966, and it's had several different banks have been in there, and now it has Table Rock construction in it. The Sunbury News started out on the south side, and it was in this glass block building, and we'll talk about it when we get over to the south side. But in this, where we are now, was the second one. It was in a little frame building called the Benoy Building. This is from a postcard showing the outside on the left and the inside on the right. Next door to the Benoy building, there was a big house that the Benoys actually lived in. The cool thing about this house is it has 5 windows over 4 windows and a door. Now originally this would have been the front of the house, not the side as it looks like here. I don't know when they turned it or why they turned it. That part seems to be lost. But if you can say 5 over 4 and a door, that's the kind of construction it was. 5 over 4 and a door. And then it was turned around. In this case, in this picture, it was in 1947, they were moving the Sunbury News out of this big building and moving it over to Vernon Street, which was where it was until they sold it out to the Delaware Gazette. That's the Vernon Street building. The town hall was built in 1868. It was built right after the Civil War. Colonel Framby's was a Civil War soldier that fought underneath General Rosecrans, but he had been a school teacher before the Civil War. When he came back to Sunbury and married his wife, who had also been a teacher, he was quite shocked to see that the boys and girls in Sunbury were still going to log cabin schools on the square. So he decided to build a private school in the middle of the square. There is a clause in our Sunbury heritage platting that says the square must always be used for the good of everyone in the community. It can't be chopped up to be a store or be a church or just be something for a certain group of people. It has to be for everyone in the town, or it goes back to the descendants of the original Myers families. So Colonel Framby's got permission to do this because after all, if he could get all of the people in town to do it, it would help. So he went door to door and he asked people to donate money. And they began giving him money to build the building. Now this was going to be a private school. It was a 2-story school. And he raised $5,000 to build the first 2 floors. Meanwhile, the Masons also wanted a place to meet, and so the Masons added $1,300 for the top floor. Now remember, this is in 1868, so women and children didn't count. So all the men were in agreement to do this, and that was how they got through the law and got past that. On the first floor of this building, there was a fire department that used this double doors. It's a wooden double door there in the middle of the building on the first floor. Today there is a single door in there with glass around it, but the actual size of the door is the original size. So while it looks big in this picture, the next time you drive by, look at it carefully and see how small it really was. Behind and over to the left of the fire door was the jail and the marshal's office. We didn't call him a sheriff in Sunbury, we called him a marshal. There was a 2-cell jail there. And over on the right side were the council chambers. In 1966, the Farmers Bank decided to build the brick building where their other bank was, and they needed some place to do business. So they went to the village fathers and said, could we use the council chambers for the bank. So they would put a vault in there. They cut out the second window from the corner there on the bottom floor and added a door so that they could use it for the bank. Later, it became the community library on the first floor, and eventually they moved up to the second floor too. Well, originally the second floor was made to be a school, and other schools used it, private schools, after that. Churches met in there on Sundays until they got enough people so they could build their own churches. And there was a theater on the second floor. If you go to the Myers Inn and you go to the meeting room, you will see the chairs that were used in the theater. They have the numbers on the backs of them. Not very comfortable, but it was all right. Now, this is not a movie theater. The movie theater was over on the corner. This is a theater with live productions, and companies would come in on the train and they would stay at the Hopkins house at that time, or the inn at that time, and then they would put on the plays for everybody. Farmers Institute was started by the farmers down at Ohio State, and they would get on a train and they would come up and teach the farmers how to do the latest things in agriculture. They would teach the wives how to do the latest things in sewing and cooking. This went for a whole week. And of course, there were entertainments every night. So sometimes there would be dances, sometimes just parties or whatever. So it was a big thing in the community. Later, there were dance studios in there for boys and girls. There was a meeting room that could be used for the scouts. They had a teen center in there at different times. And then eventually the second floor became the library also. And before it was done, the library also had the third floor. Village offices would move back into the right-hand side, those two office or windows at the right. This is a picture taken in 1966 that shows the door that was put in for the bank in the window, and it shows the door that is there now, that is a regular door with glass around it. But still, make sure you look at it and realize how small it was, because that's important in what's going to happen. Okay, the post office was in the corner building. The picture over to the right is showing the post office up closer. The lady is Miss Davis, Mrs. Davis. Her husband, Mr. Davis, was the postmaster. He was also a minister in town. And when he died, she became the postmistress. Now, this was in the 1860s, and it's very strange that she would be allowed to be a postmistress when she was not allowed to have a bank account or to own an old business because she was female. The man at the side is a young boy, and he is in knickers. Now, knickers were knee pants. It was well known that boys liked to stomp in mud puddles, which I'm sure some of you do too. And you did that, you got your wool pants wet, and they did not dry quickly. You probably only had two pair, one for every day and one for dress. So your mother did not have a washing machine and a dryer. She couldn't get these clean for you the next day. So you wore pants that only came down to your knees. But you wore socks that went under the pants all the way down and into your shoes, and that would keep your feet warm and dry. Well, RFD is rural free delivery. Up until this time in history, everyone went to the post office to pick up their mail. This is okay if you live in town, but when you lived out in town and your only mode of transportation were the horses that were used on the farm, you didn't get to town very often. So the Postmaster General decided they would start delivering mail to people that lived in the country. This started in 1897. He sent the edict out to each of the little towns to get them ready to go. Ezra Gill was the postmaster at Sunbury at the time. He went out and hired the people that he needed to drive the mail around. He actually only needed one at the beginning. He hired him, and instead of waiting for the date that the Postmaster General said to do it, he started right away. So although this picture was not the day they started, this picture was taken in 1903, he had made the Postmaster General so angry that he would not say that the first mail was delivered in Sunbury. But we know it is because this is the picture they use with the Smithsonian, and this is taken in Sunbury. And you can see it has that big white building. It's on the corner. And what is the grill? The little Whitney Insurance and the 504 and a door turned after it was turned sideways. The mail could be put in these leather bags. On one side was the inside, and on the other, or the incoming mail, and the other side was the outgoing mail. You could open that bag and you could put it over the back of a horse. You could carry it over your arm, or you could simply carry it in the wagon when you delivered the mail. And as I told you, that's Mrs. Davis, the post up there. In 1927, this big building was destroyed by fire. Now, it did not burn the grill, and it scorched it a little bit, but it didn't burn it down, and it didn't burn the insurance or the Sunbury News building. But it did burn all of the end up at the big white part that had been owned by Norman Patrick. So after the fire was calmed down, Chancey Root built the building out of brick that is there on the corner now. And that was a department store. He had all kinds of things in there. Later, a photographer was also in there. There was a beauty shop, motorcycle shop, a restaurant, antique shop, jewelry store, all kinds of things. This is a picture of the grill, and you can see the grill looks very much like it does today. It's probably the longest business in the same place, would be the grill, even though it's had different owners. And of course, Whitney Insurance is now closed. It's off to the left. Sunbury Grill and Linda's Ballroom Dancing are is in the. We've gone back up to the corner, and we're looking down towards the south. This was a postcard taken in 1908. We're going to talk about just the buildings between the two blue arrows. Doc Anderson owned the drugstore in the middle. This is Sedgwick's Cash and Carry store, which is very close to the first blue arrow. Notice that the people don't have any faces. This isn't because I whited them out, but it's because they were talking. If you moved it off for 5 minutes when they were taking the picture, it would simply blur out. So that's what's happened in this picture. The little building that's down near the other end was the undertaker. Now, the undertaker is what we call a funeral director or the funeral parlor today. Those are the people that take the bodies from the house, get them ready for burial, and actually take them into the cemetery and bury them. In the middle is a little low building that held the post office. And my grandfather, Oakfield Whitney, was the postmaster at the time this picture was taken. The area between those two blue arrows burned in a fire in 1926. If you look very carefully down here, right up next to the pole, you'll see a man with a hose squirting water out on the fire. If you look back over on the other side, you can see a wagon and a big canister, and a man is pumping water. It's very hard to see, I know. But that was the fire truck that went in and out of that door over in the town hall. Following the fire, Doc Anderson led the merchants into building a new building. One of the first things they did was put a 3-brick thick firewall up between this set of new buildings and the old building on the corner. Doc Anderson owned the drugstore, which is just to the right of the door in the middle of the building. Other things that were in there were a dress shop, a Kroger store, a U.S. store, cash and carry store, a coin-op wash, a beauty shop, dentist shop, optometrist, drugstores, frame and curves. All kinds of different things have been in there. And today, there's Evans's Insurance, Yummy Donuts, Northbrook Dental Lab upstairs and Knapp Insurance downstairs. Hickey and Associates, Foreman Realtors, and State Farm are next door. Let's go back up to the corner. This was a great big store called the Blakely Williams Building, and it was built by Mr. Blakely and Mr. Williams. It had lots of different stores inside it. It was a big department store type of building. When I was in the first grade, so I would have been between 5 and 6, I hadn't quite had my birthday. I think this was before that. So I had walked down from the Harrison Street School to the Sunbury News to go home for lunch. And there were lots of wagons being pulled by horses in front of this store. Now, they weren't these little wagons like this. These were big wagons because they actually were like campers, and the families would live in them. Well, they were gypsies. Now, gypsies are people that have been sort of pushed away from all the countries around the world, and people didn't like them and they didn't trust them. So when the gypsies came to town, all the store owners that had the signs that said open and closed turned them to closed and locked their doors and waited until the gypsies left. So what the gypsies would do was rather interesting. The man that was the head of the gypsies would be the ones that would talk to the owners of the store, so they weren't paying attention. And the ladies would have on long skirts, but instead of pockets, they had slits on the side. And you could reach through the slit, and there would be lots of pockets in the skirts underneath. So they would walk up and down the aisles in the store, and they would pick up things, slip them into their pockets, and when it was time to leave, they didn't pay for them. Now, this is shoplifting, so people don't like that when you steal from them. So no one trusted the gypsies. Well, this particular day, my father said, "Come on, let's go over there and see what's going on." So when we got there, he said to the man that was the head of the gypsies, "What is it that you need?" And he said, "Well, we need to get food for our families, and they won't let us in the store." So my father said, "Okay, you tell me what you want, and they'll let me in. I'll go in and get it for you and bring it out to you, but you still have to pay for it." Well, the gypsies didn't really trust my father any more than my father really trusted them, I think. But anyway, they agreed that I would stay outside with the gypsies. So my father went inside with their money and their list and did the shopping. Now, I thought it was a terrible thing. My babysitter had said, "If you don't be good, I'm going to give you to the gypsies. And when you're bad, the gypsies hang little girls by their feet on the clothesline and they drip blood out of their fingers." Now, that's pretty awful. And let me tell you, I was scared. Well, I stood right there by that tree near where that horse is in the picture, and I was so scared I wet my pants right there. I was crying so hard when my father came out. Now, he says he was only in the store 15 or 20 minutes, but it felt like hours to me. No gypsy touched me. They didn't even threaten me. And you know what? They don't do things like that to children at all. That was just something that babysitters said to make people behave. When I got older, I found out that lots of people said that. But when I told my father what had happened, he fired that babysitter, and we never had that one again. And no one else ever told us. So the gypsies got what they needed, and they left town. And they continue to come back every now and then. There are gypsies that still live in Columbus. Okay, so let's go back and look at what's inside this building. There was a grocery store and a meat market, and this is the meat market, and it was around the back. You went in the back door or the side door to go to that meat market. There was an electric shop that sold all kinds of lights and fixtures. And you probably don't know what those round things are, but those were the washing machines that first came out. And you washed your clothes in the bottom, and up at the top were these round things called rollers, then wringers, and they dried your clothes through those, or they squeezed out the water. It wasn't really dry. You still had to hang them out on the clothesline. If you went in the building and went back to the back, you can see the steps are going to go up to the top floor. But there was a ladies' dress shop back there, so you could buy clothing for women. On the other side, there were clothing for men, and you could go on upstairs to get into the other stores. But in 1956, the building caught fire. And you can see here the fire department is there fighting to put out the fire. It's kind of hard to see, but if you see those lights going across the street, those are Christmas lights. They hadn't been taken down when this fire had started. The fire burned all day, and you can watch the snows getting deeper and deeper as they're working to put that fire out. It finally destroyed the whole building. One of the firemen was Carlton Burr, and he happened to be in Columbus at the time. And when he came home, he could hear on his radio that there was a fire in Sunbury, but he didn't realize it was his own. In the top picture, you can see the fire truck. It's still not very big. It still was going in that door over in the town hall. And they replaced the building with this brick building that is there now. It's owned by the Breams. And it had dime stores and food stores and all kinds of things through the year. Beauty salons, candle stores. Ghost Town, a center of research, moved over to this side of the square. And today it has Village Hair Company, Edward Jones, and Firestone and Bream. Now let's go down to the end of Vernon Street and turn around and look north. In the middle of this picture is the Norman Patrick building, which had the post office in it. And if you look over to the buildings on the right, those are the ones that have burned in the fires in the previous buildings. Clear down next to the corner, not the one on the corner, but next to the corner, is a little low building that was Granger's Saloon. Note that the steps are going up, so we know this is an older building. When you went inside the building, it looked like it came right out of an old-fashioned Western. That's the beautiful bar. There's the bar across the bottom to put your foot on, and of course the brass spittoons are on the floor. The oldest building on the entire side is the one that now has Long Branch Pizza in it. It is the only building on that side that did not burn of those big old buildings. And of course the Long Branch building has the YN next to it and the Firehouse Tavern, which replaced the Granger Saloon over to the other side. Now on the end is the Kempton building. That's where the first community library was. The YWCA had decided to start the community library, and they had rented space, or were given space actually, in the basement of the Kempton building. So they would go in that white door and go down the steps into what would become the library. They had started collecting books for it in 1940. Shortly after that, in 1944, Don Perfect bought the building, and he moved the top 2 floors off and moved them over to the corner of Morning and Cherry Street to be an apartment house. Now, it's a little hard to have a library in a building that has no top on it. So the YWCA people had to find a new place to have their library. The only place they could find in Sunbury was an empty meat market on Cherry Street. This little meat market wasn't very big, but it was plenty big enough for the new library. Now that's Frank Stelzer standing out in the street. He was our town marshal. If any of you are related to the Formans or the Stelzers, he's probably your ancestor. That is me riding on the bicycle. My father used the high wheel bicycle as his symbol, an emblem for his column that he wrote in the newspaper. So I would dress up as a boy and ride this in the parade. We were in that little building from 1944 to 1954, and most of that time I was in there as a page. I helped as a volunteer for a long time, and eventually I got paid very little money, but enough that it made me really happy to work there. But in 1954, we'd outgrown the building, and so we rented the first floor of the town hall, only the part to the east, because the town council was in the part to the west. Well, eventually by 1994, we had the entire building. I started working for the library again in 1975 as a full-time or a part-time staff person. Anyway, I was in charge of children's services and things like that. And in 1994, we decided we absolutely had to get out. We had filled all 3 floors in a warehouse, and we built a new building out on Burr Drive. And I considered that my baby because I got to design that and lay everything out for it. So I was really proud of it. And Chauncey Montgomery has added to it since, but I hope you all get to visit it. I had to put that commercial in because without the community library, I wouldn't have a lot of these pictures. Early in the time that I started working for the library, we were getting ready to have a celebration in town, and I noticed that the trees were really suffering around the town hall. So I volunteered to start a marble tree fund to raise money to feed the trees and to trim them every other year. The man that was feeding the trees discovered that there were circles of 8 trees in each quadrant of the square. But several of these trees were missing. I think actually maybe 10 altogether. So I bought ash trees at the recommendation of the forestry department, and I planted them on the square in these circles to fill them out. Well, of course, the ash trees got the ash borer, and this became a bad thing to do. So what had started out to be good turned out to be bad, and all of the trees had to be cut out. When they were cutting out the last one, Les and Rosie Moeller contacted me and wanted to know if I had ever determined if the apple orchard was really a Johnny Appleseed orchard, and I said, no, it has not been determined. But we decided to go ahead and make the apple tree or the ash tree into a Johnny Appleseed statue. The Moellers paid for this, and it was an exciting time because people would come and see it and guess at what it was going to be. And until he actually got the hat on the head, no one really guessed that it was going to be Johnny Appleseed. So he became an emblem and a thing for the bicentennial in 2016. Let's return back to Vernon Street. Now we're down at the corner next to Granville Street. Here they are moving the printing press from over on Cherry Street over to the Sunbury News that's going to be in that building there to the right. This picture was in 1947. The Sunbury News was published there until 2003 when it was purchased by the Delaware Gazette and moved to Delaware. The building belongs to John Whitney, and he has rented it out to other people throughout the last few years. There was a print shop in there, Fins and Fangs pet shop, and right now he has a money manager and an insurance agent. And if you go down the alley, Whitney Inc. is in the back, which is a printing shop. Over on the other side, there used to be a law office for Joe Schilder, and it's now Berkshire Hathaway's offices. We're going to walk diagonally across the street to the south side of the square. This is a picture that was probably taken over on Cherry Street, but it is a picture of Hosey Hopkins with his dray wagon. Now, a dray was a business that was kind of like a taxi and a UPS in one. He would either carry packages or people from one place to another. Hosey also owned the Myers Inn Museum at one time when it was called the Hopkins House. If you look carefully at Hosey's horse, it looks like it only has 3 legs. Can a 3-legged horse pull a wagon with a man in it? No. Remember, photo detectives, everything isn't exactly as it looks in a photograph. There really are 4 legs on the horse, but he has 1 white foot, which makes it look like he only has 3. He also shook his head. Probably a fly was on it or a bee or something buzzing around. Remember, it took 5 minutes for a picture, so that's why it looks like he's a ghost, but he's not really a ghost. One of the neat things to me in this picture is this big house in the back, because that's where my mother and father lived when I was born, so I thought this was pretty special. But for today, we're going to look at the two buildings underneath the horse's face. They are the same two buildings that are in the left of this picture. The farthest one over on the left was the telephone office, and next door was the operator's house. We'll talk more about that picture on another slide. But those two buildings were torn down, and this house was built on that corner. This was a craft house. It was purchased from Montgomery Ward or Sears and Roebuck for so many dollars, maybe $500 would have been all it would have cost. It would have come up all torn apart, flat on a railroad car. So you would buy it, and then you would have a carpenter come and build it on your lot. And it was put where those two houses are above in the picture. This picture was 1966, and they had to move the house so they could build the Sunbury Savings and Loan. So it was moved off of this corner down here where it sits today, so you can see it on Vernon Street. Sunbury Savings and Loan went into this building. The picture is 1999. The next big house up above was taken down, and this was the telephone office that's beside the Savings and Loan. Savings and Loan became Bank One, and then Chase Bank in 2019. And the Chamber of Commerce moved in next door. And today, this is District 13. And this is what they did for Halloween 2020. This is the rest of the picture that we saw in the previous slide. The numbers for the buildings are going down here because they really start down at the corner of Granville and Columbus and come up. We've already talked about buildings 37, 39, and 45. This picture is a picture of the first cars coming to Sunbury. We know that Charlie Wheaton, that owned the building there at 31, brought the cars to Sunbury. He had 6 men go someplace and bring the cars back. We don't know where they went, and I don't know how they learned to drive because there hadn't been any cars in Sunbury before that. Charlie was also on town council, so he made sure that the mud roads became brick roads so the cars wouldn't get stuck. Right in the middle of the picture, you see a big pile of stones. Those are the curbs that go along the side of the road to keep the brick road lying in its place. As we talked about 45 on the other slot, it was the Sunbury Savings and Loan Chase Bank, and now District 13. Number 39 was the telephone office house where the lady owned, and the Big Walnut Chamber of Commerce. The Moore House and the telephone company are in where House 37 is. And we'll talk about this one on the next slide. 31 is the Wheaton building, and that's where Charlie had his store. He also owned all of those stores from 31 through 25 were his. 31 was originally Wheaton's. It was Hoax Electric. It was Hill's Drug Store, Shaw's Drug Store, and now it's Widmer's Antique Mall. 25 was the Wheaton Ackerman building, and then Ackerman and Coffee Antiques. And today it's the Bennett building. The Wheaton buildings were all of these except the one at the far end. This is Jim Furry, the taller man, and Charlie Wheaton is the shorter one. And Charlie's the one that owned all of these buildings. First, he sold farm implements. Look at this tractor with metal wheels. Can you imagine how bumpy that would be to ride? And then he sold cars, which we saw on the previous page. But in order to have cars, you have to sell gasoline. And this was a gasoline pump. People filled up the gasoline from the street, just like they did on the other side of the square. But when they changed the law and said you had to go off of the street, Charlie just cut a driveway into his building so people could drive right down the street and pull into that little area and fill up their car. Later, the state of Ohio also changed rules and said in order for you to have a gasoline station or a filling station, you needed two outhouses, one on the left back of the building and one on the right back of the building. So men would use one and women the other. Charlie refused to do this because he already had one and thought that was ample. So he quit selling gas. He opened a hardware store, probably in the building to the left, and a paint store. And other things that have been in there have been an antique store and a clothing store, a floor covering store, a video color print shop, and a Doodly Dips moved down there before they left town. And there was also a Dave's Den in there. And karate is upstairs. Some of you maybe take that. This was Helen Coffey's antique shop. And if you look at this, you'll see there are ladders that are hooked onto the railing on the ceiling. When the people went to the stores, you would ask the owner of the store to get whatever you wanted, and they would climb these ladders and go along and get the objects off the shelves. These would have been in lots of the stores around the square, but this is the only one that we have a picture of them. And we hope that they will stay there for a very long time. This is what the building looked like when Marion Ackerman owned it. (9 to 11 East Granville Street). This is the first building that the Sunbury News was in. We talked a little bit about it when we were on the north side, but this is where it was originally. It was originally called The Item, and it was published in here. There was a dentist office upstairs and the Sunbury News downstairs. Later, it became Needles Market across the whole bottom downstairs. And the cool thing about this picture, which was taken in 1955, is that then there was a problem around town with people writing things on the windows at Halloween time. So the art departments at the school and the people owned the businesses went together and they had a contest, and boys and girls would just draw their paintings or whatever they wanted and submit them. And the ones that were selected were given a window, and they were given Bon Ami and tempera paints mixed for them to paint those designs on the windows. This was quite a fun thing to have at Halloween time. Later that became Bob's Barber Shop, and here it is before they took it down and they built the new municipal building. This was the last house on that side of the street, and it was a house. Letts lived in the house at one time, and then after he was through with it and sold it to the Wheatons. This was Charlie Wheaton's house that owned all of those stores up the street. Charlie's wife, Daisy, fell in love with Mexican architecture when they went to Mexico, so she covered the house with stucco and put red tile roof on it. Dr. Swickert bought the building, and he cut down some of those bushes in front and made a ramp down to the basement where he could put a 2-bed hospital. This was a place for boys and girls to have their tonsils out, for ladies to have babies, things like that, because it was a long way to the hospital, which was in Columbus. Dr. Livingston bought out the office, and he used it for a while until he built his new office up on Vernon Street. But the family lived in this house for a while also. And then it became the Hoke home. After that, it was a municipal building for Sunbury until it was torn down and this building replaced it in 1982. Well, we're back around where we started. In the middle of this picture is the Boyer Hotel or the Chapman House. In 1888, there were auctions once a month in the summertime. The auctioneer would stand on the balcony at the Myers Inn or the Hopkins House, which is over at the right, and would auction off horses or whatever they were auctioning that particular day. If you notice how big the building is in the middle, it's been cut down several times, so it's not nearly that big today. It was also owned by Mr. Chapman at one time and Sam Hopkins, who was Hosey's cousin. And that big building that you can see in the back, you can see where it's been cut off over here at the left in this picture. And they put a filling station in there. And the filling station is no longer there, but that building is still beside it. It's had several different people living in there and working there. You can see the gazebo on the square and the Myers Inn and the building we were just talking about. Well, we're truly back to the beginning. When you visit the Myers Inn Museum, watch for things like the one-room house, the Gelston key, the high sill, the doctor's tools, the RFD mailbag, the stone fireplace, and of course the raccoon who saved the bank. More information is available on the local history web link. And if you have questions, feel free to email me at info@bigwalnuthistory.org, and we'll try to get the answers for you.